How's it going? I'm Roth. I'm a high school teacher in Roseville, California.
I'm Bryce Wong, .swoosh virtual footwear and collections designer.
My shoe design was a pixel rope in reference to the old duotone 8-bit games on our phones from back in the day. There's like one part nostalgia, like 3 parts like this message that I wanted to share of like creativity and like the simplicity of our phones from the past.
One of the coolest things about seeing your mood board turned to virtual shoe was just like how succinct your story was. It wasn't until we first started talking about it that we kind of found that there was layers to the story.
All of the numbers have a meaning, but it's not the numbers themselves that have the meaning, right? And it was actually your idea to bring in, with those old phones, we had to use the T9, right? But we ended up taking some of the standard Nike Air branding, but we just did the, 6.4, is it 6.453? We ended up taking that and bringing that in and then making it look pixelated like we would have had on those older phones. And we did the same with the Air.
We are able to adjust tooling and do things that like were kind of outside the norm. The stuff that only Drake can do on his Air Force One sole, but we did that with yours virtually. That's the kind of stuff that I felt was really cool working with you, and because you had that idea of like what footwear was already, you were able to like just dive right in. Even cooler was your knowledge of Nike history and like the fonts and the typefaces we use.
In the world of graphic design, for me, a really important thing is like typography. My wife and I, she also does graphic design, and you don't want to go on a road trip with us if you don't want to talk about the fonts being used. Nike and Futura, peanut butter and jelly at this point. So I wanted to make sure that, I could go find some pixelated font and get permission to use it or whatever, but it's like, I wanted to actually go in and make it. So that was my homework in between some of our meetings, was to go in, because I was like, I'm making the graphics. That's something that I wanted to do. And one of the first concepts that I had, when we go into the first meeting, was basically just to straight up take the shoe one for one. We talked about having the screen be the tongue itself, and we hit some limitations there. But then we were also talking about how this is really paying homage not just to older phones, but just older games, the simpler games, right?
But there's definitely a time where we were struggling to figure out how do we translate this? How one-to-one do we want? What's the kind of the messaging? So I really like where we landed, because it feels like an immediate sense of nostalgia. But then you're like, but how does that kind of connect to this story? I would love it if you could talk to us about what the red kind of color symbolizes, and then even what the messaging is kind of on that back heel tab.
In the first meeting, we kind of almost walked away with just that phone concept, right? And it was actually Logan called us out. He's like, where's your story fitting within this? And that's when I realized bringing the red in. So when we look at a lot of the older phones, red wasn't a thing that popped up on our screens. Now on our phones, that red dot, and there's lots of articles and stuff about how it just starts to own our lives, right? And so I thought how can I bring that into the shoe? But it was also this idea of that disruption from that flow, maybe you could say, the creative flow that we can have in life. As a dad, a newer dad, I can spend a day with my daughter and then realize that half that day was spent on my phone because these notifications keep popping up, and so I'm not really spending the day with her. And at the end of the day, we're snuggling, and right now I'm I wish I had more of this, and the reality is I could have had a ton more of it. We put red on the outsole, and that was more of a direct call to those notifications, and we kind of talked about the idea of stomping them out, but also stepping by them and working past them. And then we had the red on the battery, and just that idea of the drainage. And so then that ties into the last little detail you mentioned just barely, which is on the back tab, we put a phone number, right? Because a message that I've really wanted to try and encourage as a teacher, as a creator, is really just having other people create more. I figured out create more is 10 digits. And so if you look at T9 again, you'll see that back tab just says create more.
I think as somebody who found art and design through my primary school, through high school education, those types of messages and the teachers like yourself is what got me to kind of to be where I am today. So it was just such a cool story to be able to bring it to life and actually have your voice through the shoe, kind of telling people to create more. So being part of this one was really cool.